Alright folks, today I'm going to give you my first impressions of the Ronin 4D. That's this guy right here. Alright, there we go. Let me get into the motivations for why I purchased this camera, because you might share some of the same motivations, and these are some of the things that you might be considering or thinking about before purchasing this camera. I'm a solo filmmaker. One of the things that I hate is carrying around a lot of gear. As a photographer, I used to get away with carrying a lot less gear. Quite frankly, everything that I would carry around would have to fit into this. My lenses, my batteries, everything into here. The thing about not carrying around a lot of gear is it's not just a question of the number of hands available, but it's the clunkiness of it all, you know, and it's just not how I like to move to the dance of filmmaking, if you know what I'm saying. Now, my experience with filmmaking, however, has been is that there's always at least two choices that I have to make. Forgetting lights and sound, do I want to take a tripod with me or not? Do I want to take a gimbal with me or not? And a lot of the times I would opt for no. Like I said, I just hate carrying around so much stuff. Now the 4-axis gimbal on this camera, this allows me to go into a shoot without having to carry an external or a separate gimbal. And it also allows me to go without necessarily having to have a tripod with me to get that locked off shot. Doesn't mean that I won't go with a tripod at times. However, I can get a locked off shot and I don't have to have a tripod on me. That already is a huge win for me for this camera, because it allows me to wander a little bit more freer and not anchored down with gimbals and tripods. Now, the other reason, and also the main reason for me to get this camera, is camera movement. There we go. Now, before I had the Ronin 4D, my main shooter was the Sony a7S III, which is a fantastic camera. Quite frankly, I wish Sony showed it the same amount of love that they did with the FX3 in terms of firmware updates, but even without the firmware updates, fantastic camera. But with some limitation, and let's get into it. Camera movement. There's 3 types of camera movement. 1, you lock it off on a tripod and don't move it at all. 2, you get that handheld feeling, you get that handheld look, which to be honest is an art on its own. There's a fine line between having this cool handheld look and Uncle Bob shooting your son or daughter at football practice, and then you get this jittery, falling all over the place kind of a look, and that's not great at all. And finally, you've got this smooth glide of the camera through the whole world that it's filming, right? Think of that shot in Goodfellas where Ray Liotta takes his new girlfriend into the club and the camera just glides and flows and moves along, or the opening shot of The Revenant as well. It's just beautiful work. Now, previously with the Sony a7S III, that kind of movement, and I'm not saying I'm anywhere near that sort of level, but at the least, even attempting it was only possible with a gimbal. And quite frankly, I hate gimbals. I hate carrying them around. They're clunky, they're big, they're something additional to carry around. You have to calibrate it constantly if you switch lenses, and it's just such a pain in the butt, to be honest, that I was either just locking it off or doing the handheld thing. And there's a lot of times I didn't take the tripod with me, so then I used the active stabilizer on the Sony a7S III, which is great, but not ideal to be able to get as still a shot as possible. Now, I'll get into that movement in a second, but let's also just mention this camera is new. New cameras motivate, they ignite a flame in you. And the thing about new, though, is it's generally novel, and novelty wears off real quick. What this camera, though, gives me is a feeling similar to that I have with my Leica photo cameras. Leica cameras aren't built just to make taking a photo easy, but also to make it pleasurable. And what I find the parallel to the Ronin 4D is, the Ronin 4D makes movement easy, but not just easy, it also makes experimenting and learning the art of movement very pleasurable. I don't have to worry about the gimbal because it's already built in, and now I can just worry more about learning the art of camera movement to convey emotion, to convey some part of the story that the camera move is supposed to. One way or another, I'm enjoying learning the art of smooth camera movement with this Ronin 4D. But again, it's early days still, and as Angela Merkel so famously said,
the proof of the pudding is the eating. Let's start.
The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Ultimately, I'm still at the start of my filmmaking journey, and the main litmus test for this camera is going to be, will it help me progress on my filmmaking journey faster or in a different way than I would have without it? So let's talk about the gimbal learning curve as well, because quite frankly, I rented this camera first before purchasing and I had it for 2 days. And the initial learning curve to get smooth footage is super minimal. Already in the first day, you're playing with moves that you didn't think were possible, that at the very least for me were not possible before. Now, the very next learning curve, however, is, like I mentioned earlier, to understand the theory of camera movement and how it lends to the story that you're filming. Also, there's auto manual focus, which is this knob over here. Once you've got auto manual focus engaged, then this knob will turn as it does its autofocus, and then you can interrupt it and do manual focus. That is another learning curve that is relatively simple, but still there's a bit to learn to figure out how to get it in a way that is not jarring for the viewer at the end. In terms of image quality, so far I love D-Log. If you're pretty comfortable grading Sony S-Log 3, then you'll easily adapt to D-Log. I find the image quality of its 6K sensor top-notch, but at the same time I also feel it's a little bit too early to say. I will have a more definitive statement over that in the next few months to come. Let's talk about the camera itself. It's 4.6 kilos, which is about 10 pounds, and you know, it's heavy. I mean, it's not so much the weight as it is the rhythm of the motors, especially when you've got the Z-axis enabled, that are fighting to keep the lens and the sensor stable. The rhythm of that translates into your arms a little bit, and they will end up dampening some of that movement as well. And your muscles are firing and adjusting the whole time also. That is something to get used to. I find in terms of the shooting experience, especially with the handles on the side, and then you can hold it to your chest if you want to, or then just hold it here. I find the shooting experience is very ergonomic, but it's more when you're not shooting to lug it around. That's when it really starts to make its weight and its shape known, especially because I don't want to put it into my backpack or anything. I want to hold it and then get ready to shoot relatively quickly. It's more like when you move house. The sofa isn't heavy, it's just kind of awkward to hold. And that's what I would compare the Ronin 4D to when you're not actually shooting the camera. The monitor is super bright. What I find amazing is how they've put 14 buttons on here. You've got 4 here, 4 here, 3 here, 2 here, and then this dial is another one. So 14 buttons and a dial. Generally, I hate buttons. That's why for my photography, I use Leica cameras. They don't have many buttons at all, and somehow still manage to translate into a good shooting experience. This is a gripe of mine that I have with my Sony, because there's just so many buttons and I don't like it. And I find DJI have done a really top-notch job of putting in a lot of buttons, but them not getting in your way. That's really impressive. So kudos to you. DJI runtime is I'm not switching the camera off. I don't like to switch it on and off the whole time because it takes about 10 to 15 seconds to boot up. So I keep it on. If I'm not using the Z-axis, I turn it off, and then I'm shooting every 5 minutes for a minute or so. Yeah, then it runs for around 2 hours or so. I don't have very scientific tests for it. What I can say is I'm happy. What I can definitely recommend though is you should have at least 3 batteries on you. And quite frankly, if you're going to do a whole day's worth of shooting, you should up it to 5. At the moment, I've got 3. I don't have an assistant to be charging those batteries in between, so I will definitely buy 2 more batteries at one point. I feel like 5 is probably a safe number. The high bright monitor, I've got it as well. Here it is. I haven't used it enough to be able to give you a proper first impression, to be honest. That's why I haven't spoken so much about it. I feel that it does its job well. One thing what is clear, and let me give you a tip, is definitely want to have multiple batteries on this thing, because this battery runs down real fast, and unlike the charger for the batteries of the Ronin 4D, that charger charges the battery super fast. The charger for the battery on the high bright monitor, yeah, that charges it at the speed of smell, basically. It's just super slow. I haven't quite figured out, maybe I'm using crappy power plug or something, I'm not quite sure. I'm not impressed with that, to be honest. It takes forever to charge. It runs the battery down real quick. Definitely have multiple batteries on this one. All right, so some tips. One thing definitely, you want to have a rocket air blower on you at all times, because in all 20 years of having digital cameras, I've never had a sensor exposed to air as much as this sensor. Whether it is changing the lens or whether it's changing a mount, the exposure time to the elements is a lot more than on any camera I've ever had. Definitely keep one of these on you always. And I'll talk about the mount in another video, but it is very cool. I very much enjoy it. If you flip the screen around a lot like this, I would definitely map one of these buttons, C1 or C2, I've mapped C1 to then flip the screen as well, because it's annoying to have to go into the menu to do it, and it doesn't do it automatically. I wish it did. Quite frankly, I think that should be possible. DJI, maybe you could do something there. C1 is by default mapped to centering the gimbal, and if you double tap that trigger there, then it does that as well. So it made perfect sense to remap it to flip the screen. So far, I'm loving the Ronin 4D. It is allowing me to learn the art of movement for filmmaking, which is great because my focus is on filmmaking and not the actual camera and how to make that happen. I'll be dropping a lot more videos about the Ronin 4D over the next few weeks, months. So if you're interested in seeing those, definitely subscribe. If you've got any questions, then let me know in the comments below, or just, hit me up on my socials. Peace.